Good evening, everybody. It's Lisa Falkenstein. I am one of the clinical managers, and I also have Celeste Alexander online with me. And a little bit about Celeste. She is our Georgia OT mentor. She is a professor at Brenau, and she's a really good speaker. So you guys are in for a good treat. All right. Well, welcome, Celeste. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm just a regular OT, just like y'all. And at this phase of my life, this is just what I happen to be doing right now. But I will go ahead and just disclose my passion for school-based OT. I am the strange animal in the world that really loves school-based OT. I know it is a rose with many thorns, but I love that it is a functional, real environment for children and adolescents. So you'll have to forgive me because I feel like an outlier sometimes, but I hope I can share that passion and contagion with you this evening. The sensory OT in me says, please get your glass of water or beverage of choice and something to keep you alert. Stand up, move, just please stay attentive. Do what you need to do to keep yourself alert and engaged and attentive. And I will try to do that as well, even though we aren't looking at each other face to face. But please know that I am cognizant that it's after a long school day and we just need to keep ourselves alert and moving. So thank you again. This is part one of a two-part series. I call it school-based OT, and it does apply to PT. And I thought we might have a PT on our line, but I don't think Andrea's on just yet. But so to me, it is an adventure, and it certainly is in disguise some days. And I hope you're all chuckling and laughing because it certainly can be. So you're probably thinking, all right, so why am I here? Why did I log in? And these are otherwise known as learning objectives in the academic world or AOTA world. So I hope this evening that I can share with you knowledge of the overall framework of the OT's roles within our educational setting. We'll define special ed services, related services, supplemental aids and services, what I call decoding the alphabet soup. You'll see in just a moment. Just a brief review of IDEA, which really drives what we do, Part B services, and disability categories, which we know more as eligibilities in the school system. I also hope to more accurately describe the components of student, hang on, I got to minimize my little screen here a second because I'm over, student IEPs and the overall IEP process. And again, like I said just a few minutes ago, I hope to inspire you to provide outstanding OT service provision in the school setting. So welcome again. And so let's just basically start with hopefully what we all know. What is our role? Just as an OT practitioner, we obviously look at functional abilities and engagement in daily routines for anyone across the lifespan. The occupation of life skills, okay? So in our areas of occupation, we look at work, leisure play, social participation, ADLs, IADLs, and we also look at education. So just again, I know we all remember this from Foundations of OT, but just wanted to bring it forward. Now, as a school-based OT or PT, I'm going to try to be fair in my broadening terminology. Now, I know PTs also, they look at function in a different way, but I do know that their job as well is to have a child with the highest functional skills within the classroom, just as we do. So what we want to look at is helping a child or a student fulfill their occupational role each day in that classroom. We help children prepare and perform important learning and school-related activities, whether it's carrying the lunch tray, or whether it is writing something on a piece of paper, or whether it is sitting in circle time. We are there to help promote independence and function. So if you're ever, in a quandary of, do I serve this student? Do I not serve this student? What do I do? What does my assessment say to me? Think about, is this child's skill set or deficit or anything about this child impeding independence and function in that classroom? that helps me draw the line of what I need to do. We also provide support for academic and non-academic outcomes, and we'll talk about more of that in just a little bit. We look at social skills and math, reading, writing, which everyone's calling literacy now. Behavior management. Okay, OT, you got to fix that behavior in that child, right? I hope you're all chuckling and smiling. Recess. I go out and see my children at recess sometimes. I tell you a story later remind me about the first time in 20 years I saw a real STNR on the playground. Never saw one in school. Confession. Saw one on a playground. Participation in sports, self-help skills, pre-vocational, vocational participation, and more. So we do this for our children and students with disabilities in the school setting, 3 to 21. Now, I know in Maryland, if anybody's on from Maryland, they also include their infants and toddlers program, their basically 0 to 3 program, is under the umbrella of the school system. Not that way in Georgia or Virginia or North Carolina or South Carolina or Florida that I'm familiar with, or Alabama, but Maryland is the one state I think that we serve that I'm aware that happens. And Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know differently. So then the last role is to help our students access, progress, and participate in the general curriculum in the least restrictive environment. And that's sometimes that's tricky. And I know it took me a long time to really understand what does that mean. And I truly think that means different things for each student. So here's your key idea. We are the star of the show right here. So OT and PT are related services, and they are provided when children need support to benefit from their special education services. So this is why we're not a primary service. This is why we're not on the front line. We're the first one to get the referral and all of that. A lot of our children are already in special ed sometimes when we get those referrals, but we are support services. So this is a main thing to remember about educational OT or school-based OT. It doesn't minimize our role. It's just, when do we come in the picture? And I hope that this will become clearer as we go through methodology of how, IEPs and the structure of them, and just a little bit of our history. So now, the adventure, okay? So let's see. I want to make sure I don't skip anything. Okay, and we'll come back to least restrictive environment in just a little bit. Okay, so in school-based practice, we said before, OT, we identify services and modifications necessary for the child to actively participate in the educational environment. And I think PT does that as well sometimes too, within their own framework. We promote skill, attainment, function, and independence within the school setting. And the reason I call it an adventure is sometimes it's a challenge, but it is an adventure because you scratch your head and you're like, where do I go now? What do I do for this child now? What's out there for this child? So that, it wasn't really an accident that I coined this terminology. So let's look at some of the student outcomes areas. So this is when and how we engage in this adventure. So we work in the classroom. We're looking at classroom skills. We are looking at playground and sports participations. We look at outcomes there. Self-help skills, or in the school setting, sometimes they're called adaptive skills, social participation, mobility, social emotional learning, assistive technology, sensory regulation, pre-vocational, and transition needs. So with transition, what we're speaking of there is if you are going from elementary to middle school, or preschool to elementary, or middle to high, there are always transition needs and transition meetings for those students that are still under our services at that time. So that's what that means in terms of transition needs for the children. Okay, so now, again, take a sip of that beverage if you have one, stick a butterscotch or peppermint in your mouth, and get ready for how did we get here? I promise it won't be boring. Think Neil Armstrong, okay? Those famous words. So stay with me for a quick history lesson, okay? So, what happened is initially OT and PT services were provided to children with orthopedic and neurological problems secondary to, and you have to think back a long way, maybe grandparents may have suffered with this, with polio, okay? So think about that. So occupational therapists were hired by, at that time in 1935, what was called, the agency was called Crippled Children's Services, or CCS. And this was, again, an arm of the Social Security Act, and it was called the Maternal and Child Health Program. Okay. Now, I confess I didn't know that in school. When I developed this course in my research, I learned that. So if you knew that already, you are ahead of the game. So anyway, so these CCS was the entity that put us to work at that time. Then in the 1940s and 50s, we looked at more of the orthopedic focus of school children through CCS again. So those children who had the orthopedic handicaps, or at the time muscular dystrophy, polio, CP, obviously they were going to school, okay? Then we hop over to the 60s and the early 70s, and really the educational needs of these children were not being met. And the research tells us that more than half of the children with disabilities did not receive appropriate educational services. They estimate, and this is, I'm looking at a resource that's written by Pate Ryba, Jane K. Smith. It's like a school-based book. And they estimated that 1 million children with disabilities were excluded from the public school system or denied the opportunity to experience the educational process with their peers because they had a disability. So it was huge. And honestly, I grew up, I was in elementary school in the 70s, and I don't remember that many children with disabilities in my school or in my class. I think there was one little boy that used to see a vision therapist. He wore glasses, but you know, that was the extent of it. So these children were excluded. They were taken to different places. They had their own separate schools, if they were even addressed, their needs were addressed at all. So then, drum roll, comes in 1975, the famous law from, now do remember this from school, it was drilled in our head, Public Law 94-142. And of course, this came about from Supreme Court decisions in the early 70s. Mills versus the Board of Education is a very famous case that you might remember from school. So there came, in the end, Public Law 94-142, which guaranteed children with disabilities ages 6 to 21 years old a free and appropriate education. Okay? And what it did is it really gave us job security as related services. So it made sure that the provision of related services, including OT and PT, was required to assist the child with disabilities and to help them benefit from special education. And again, it was really the precursor to IDEA. And so here comes our alphabet soup. So we had a little bit of a time, obviously, between 75 and 90. And there were different parts, Part A, Part B, Part C. We had different parts to the law, lots of amendments in the mid-80s. Preschool children, 3 to 5 year old, is considered Part B of the public law, and that serves what we know is our preschool. And then Part C developed the 0 to 3 population, which is our infants and toddlers, and those children are served under an IFSP, which is an individual and family service plan, if you serve any children in the 0 to 3 population or have. Okay, so 1990 though, basically what happened is the law changed again, and it was given the title of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the reason they changed the name was to indicate the importance of using people-first language rather than identifying children by disability. Okay? And at that time also, autism and traumatic brain injury were added as disability eligibility categories at that time. Okay? So again, and I know our teachers in schools sort of drilled in our heads that, you know, we don't talk about people as a stroke, or you don't talk about someone as a brain injury. It's a client, a member, a student with a brain injury. So I think this was along those same lines. They were putting the child first. Okay, so again, this is the top part, 75. It was a very good year for us. Like I said, it was our job security at the time. So now, if we look at a definition of what is special education, we're going to think about breaking it down and what it really means. And I've taken this, in the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years, I've been working closely with a speech therapist in our company who was a former coordinator of Cobb County Schools and for speech program. And as she and I sort of pick things apart, it really struck me why IEPs are developed the way they are, and it really, what special ed is supposed to be. Okay, you hear me say supposed, and I hope you're smiling again. It is really, by definition, specifically designed at instruction at no cost to the parent, except through their tax dollars. Let's not forget that. It's not completely free. Everybody pays taxes. But in order to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. So it's not supposed to be this blanket panacea or cure-all or fix-it. It's supposed to be individualized for that child. And I know I'm guilty. I didn't have that in the forefront of my mind. And I encourage you to think about that. And so if you're considering service time or service delivery models, that you remember that it's supposed to be meeting the unique needs of that child, okay? So then, what is a related service? So, and I'm going to have a poll for you in just a second. So let's look at the bullets. A related service is a developmental, corrective, or a supportive service. A related service is needed in order to meet measurable goals and receive more alphabet soup, free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. Okay, so with that, I would like for you to just take, well, let me give you one more little slide, and then you can take a minute. I want you to, I'm going to take a poll. So again, here is the definition of FAPE, and this is from a book called Wright's Law, which I love. It is a little small green paperback book, and it's called All About IEPs, okay? And so a free and appropriate public education is supposed to be an individualized educational program designed to meet the child's unique needs and from which the child receives educational benefits and prepares them for either further education, employment, and hopefully independent living. That's what it's supposed to do, okay? Sounds a lot like special ed, but that's why we look at that so carefully when we consider a lot of pieces of an IEP or extended school year services or things like that, which we'll get to. So now, let's see, polls. All right, y'all, this is technology. Let's see if technology is going to be my friend here. All right, so the question is, let's see if I can get this to come up. Oh, okay. Can you all, launch. Here we go. Oh, poll must be, okay, closed to enable screen sharing. Okay, I closed it. Share. Uh-oh. Okay, I don't know if I did this right, y'all.
So that's what you share it at the end.
What, Lisa? Sorry, say it again.
You share the results at the end.
Okay, well, okay, all right, so let me hide it. Okay, so can y'all fill it out though? I mean, are you able?
We see it.
You don't see it. Okay, that's what I'm worried about.
Here, hold on. Let me see. Can I try?
Yes, you try. Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have let you.
Here it is.
Oh, that says poll results. I think I messed something up, Lisa. Okay. Well, all right. Let's just keep moving for time's sake. Sorry, y'all. I'll get it for next time. Basically, the question was, how many related service categories or related service providers do you think there are within special ed? So I mean, like categories. Like, okay, you know, there's at least 2 because you know there's OT/PT. So I was just going to take a poll and see what it came up with. But how many do you think? You think it's 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, or 7 to 10? Okay, so just think about that. And then I will, I'm sorry I messed up our poll. I'll try to do the next, I have one more and I may let Lisa do it next time. So, all right, so who knew? Okay, y'all, related services include, but are not limited to, speech, language, and audiology services. We'll come back to that because you're probably thinking, wait, speech, language, they're primary. Hold on, they can't be related and primary. Well, they can. I learned that too a year or 2 ago. All right, interpreting services, psychological and social services, counseling and rehab, counseling, PT/OT, orientation and mobility services, rec therapy, early identification and assessment of children with disabilities, school health and school nurses. Did you know a school nurse was a related service? I had no idea. Medical services for diagnostic purposes, and parent and teacher training. Who knew? I didn't know. That is 10, folks. That is 10. Now, just to further just share with you about speech language and what happens if a child's primary category of disability or eligibility in the school is speech impaired, like that's the main thing that's sticking out right now, then speech language is going to be a primary service and not a related service. But let's say that the primary diagnostic category or eligibility is orthopedic impairment or autism or other health impaired with a secondary of speech, then they become a related service. So I hope that makes sense. So if the speech impairment is not the primary eligibility or category, then speech becomes a related service. Otherwise, it is primary. So I hope that helps. And you can say you learned something new every day. At least I did a few years ago. So thank you, Debbie Lozo, for that. So, all right. So just a little brief recap of what we just went through is, so IDEA, basically Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So from 1990 to 2004, there were many positive changes, as we know, that continued to occur after 75, leading to 90. This law provides federal funds, so IDEA provides federal funds to help state and local governments establish and maintain SPED, which is special ed programs, in addition to providing related services, all 10 of those of what you just saw a few minutes ago, to students who require them. So specific sections of IDEA, and I'm sorry I said public law before, I meant it became IDEA, are all related to service provision of various ages. So we said Part C was early intervention. Part B is what we do. Okay, so between 97 and 99, just know there were additional amendments to IDEA. You don't need to know them, doesn't really, doesn't affect the price of tea. But then just know also too that in 2004, IDEA was reauthorized federally. Big deal, big deal. And there came the birth of RTI, or response to intervention. And there is more of that to come. We'll briefly touch on RTI in a couple of slides. Okay, so again, just a brief recap about special education. What does it mean? Remember, if you don't take anything away from tonight, specially designed instruction for the child, okay? So schools by law are required to provide special instruction by adapting content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to meet the unique needs of the student with the disability. So it includes instruction that's in the classroom, in the home, in hospitals and institutions, and in other settings Okay. It also includes instruction in physical education. And you know about adaptive PE. So we are bound. I mean, some of you may have homebound students on your caseloads. I've never actually been to a hospital through a school setting, but you know, somebody that I met, somebody has though in some place. Gosh, I wish I could remember. Maybe it was Virginia one time. I don't recall. But anyway, I do believe that someone, maybe in Virginia Beach, did have to visit. The child was in a long-term hospitalization setting, and it was school-based therapy that was provided there. So, okay. So onward and upward. Okay. Eligibility for special ed services. Okay, these are the categories that you're going to find in your IEPs or your individualized education plans. Students are tested for these different categories, and wherever their deficits fall the greatest is really the eligibility that is given to them. Eligibility is just a category that provides a certain level of special education services. Okay, that's really all it does, other than identifying too of what might be happening with the child. So these are all the categories that you see. I don't need to go through them with you, but I just want to draw your attention to the third bullet from the bottom. You'll see it sometimes on an IEP, and it says SI, and the first time I looked at that, I was like, SI, sensory integration, is it eligibility? Oh my gosh. And then I realized, oh no, no, it's not. So you'll see that. Now, our preschoolers, you'll see a lot of SDD, which is significant developmental delay. But once they get past a certain age and into the full elementary program, you're going to see these eligibilities. Okay. All right. Okay. So on for more alphabet soup. And I just want to point out that we're looking at intellectual disabilities next. Okay. A lot of our students, you will hear, oh, it's MOID or MID, or again, more of these letters. And what I wanted to do was share this with you because a lot of our students will fall within these eligibilities. So intellectual disability is what was formerly known as mental retardation. We don't use that term anymore, but that's really where it grew from that. Intellectual disability is characterized by, and this is the important part, y'all, significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and in adaptive behaviors. Okay, and you'll see what intellectual functioning, those in parentheses, and then what adaptive means. Okay, the reason I draw your attention to that, because some children with developmental disabilities or just disabilities don't always have an intellectual disability. Some of them do, but some of them don't. So I'm just drawing your attention and cautioning you to just remember what an intellectual disability encompasses, okay? So it also has to originate before the age of 18, okay? So those are like two little qualifiers there. An intellectual disability includes levels of minimal, which is MID, moderate, MOID, and severe and profound. Now, our severe and profound, maybe you all have seen them. Those are our children who 9 times out of 10, not always, but a lot of the time are in chairs or very physically involved. Sometimes verbal skills are limited. Sometimes they have assistive technology devices to help them with communication. There are really our most involved students from an intellectual and sometimes physical. So again, you're looking at adaptive and intellectual, and our severe kids sometimes will have that physical component as well too. So wanted to draw that attention to that concept. Okay, so now the reason I hop to response to intervention, or RTI, is because this is, you have to think about it in terms of think of a triangle or a pyramid. And when you reach the top of the pyramid, that is when you're referring for special ed, and you've tried other interventions, you've tried other strategies, nothing's worked, and so you've provided these base layers of strategies and interventions, and you've got to go to the top with a referral. But response to intervention is based upon research that indicates that many students respond to high quality instruction or intervention, and therefore they may not need special ed or other services. And there's the reference of where you see. So sometimes it could be that a teacher will go to, in most schools, there's something called the student support team, and that's where teachers take concerns about students initially, and they talk about them, and sometimes they will employ certain strategies. They will employ preferential seating. They might try, maybe a study carrel around them. They might call us and say, can we try a pencil grip? Can we try something? Yet they haven't been referred to special ed, and they're not on an OT caseload. That's the basis of what RTI is. It happens usually in general education. It's a federal program, but each state is responsible for employing it the way they want to. And you'll see differences from county to county. Some of you may hear RTI ad nauseum. Others of you may go, I've never heard of that. We never do that. And that's fine. I just wanted to make you aware that it's sort of a precursor of strategies or a process that happens sometimes before our children get to special ed. So, and it helps cut down, on referrals sometimes. So, let me see, I think I've got another slide more about RTI. So again, general education framework, it came about, if you recall a couple of slides back, the 2004 reauthorization of IDEA, brought in RTI. And if you Google RTI, there's tons of different RTI triangles out there. There's explanations. It's pretty self-explanatory if you read it. The last bullet also helps you understand how they identify learning disabilities. And how RTI helps them sort of tweak out whether a child needs to go on or doesn't need to go on to special ed or not. And it's talking about how in the past we've looked at an ability achievement discrepancy, that approach, rather than really looking at mathematical discrepancies between scores achieved on standardized assessments. I'm sorry. Okay, so again, I don't want to spend tons of time because some districts don't even mention it. Others, like I said, you might hear ad nauseum. Okay, so now, Lisa, I'm going to ask you if you can go to my second poll so I don't mess it up. And if you could publish the second poll, and I'm checking my watch. Oh my goodness, I gotta talk fast, y'all.
I am doing it.
If you can. If not, I'll try. Okay, so
I did it.
Okay, you'll off air. You'll have to show. I don't know what I did wrong.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, I think everybody. It says 20% voted. So far, 20%, 50%. Okay, y'all, numbers are coming in. And it's not even November of 2016 yet. Oh my goodness, y'all, it's going to be a long year and a half, is all I can say. Just a little aside there. 80% voted. All right, come on, we're looking for 100% vote here, 100% vote of you all out there. So are parents part of an IEP team? Yes or no? All right, 80% of you.
You ready me to close?
90%. Hold on, let's 5 more seconds. We'll see if we get that 100% vote. If not, we'll go with 90% of the
you know what?
viewers.
It
90%
may be me.
of our
Let me
pediatric viewers. Yes, we'll go ahead. 90% have voted. It's been about a minute. So go ahead, Lisa. I'll let you share. Okay. So can everybody see them? So the answer is yes. You all are just smart therapists. That I'm Okay, so let's, okay, sorry, I'm going to, if we have time, I'll come back to that, but here's more on RTI and how it is a proactive model. It's not reactive, it's proactive, okay? Okay, okay, and I'll come back to that slide. So stars of the IEP show, who are they? The student IEP team. Yes, parents are. Students are as well if they're age appropriate. So you've got a special ed teacher or your related service provider. Hello, that might be one of us. School psychologist, school system representative, which could be in some counties they're called, this IST is an instructional support teacher. Some districts they're called a special education facilitator. Sometimes they're called lead teachers, liaisons. They have all kinds of different names, but they're basically the folks that are in charge of all the special ed within that school. And they're called all different, they have different labels and acronyms to add to the alphabet soup. And then, of course, there is the regular education teacher, which is, it came about in the later years. So you should always have a gen ed teacher or regular ed teacher. So these are your stars, okay? Now let me back up and talk to you about how we access services and end up with that IEP team, okay? So there is an initial eval for special ed services, and that's usually completed by a public agency. Well, in our world, that's school, okay? Important, parental consent must be obtained. Don't ever evaluate a child in a school setting if you don't have parental consent. If somebody says, oh, the parents signed that, just say, blame it on us. Say, my manager says I need to see, the signed form. We have had students assessed where parent consent was not obtained, and it was not pretty, okay? So most of our students will go through what is called a full and an individualized evaluation. Now, let me back up. We haven't even gotten to the OT part yet. This is where the educational diagnostician, the psychologist, all these other folks are looking at the child, okay? Why do we put the child through this? Well, we need to determine if they have a disability, if we don't know yet. Sometimes they have a documented disability or diagnosis. We also do this to really determine the educational needs of the child. Okay, great, this child has a disability or a diagnosis, but do they have educational needs that are, impeding their function in the classroom? They may not. And the law says we must assess all areas of suspected disability. Okay, once all that's done, which takes weeks, as you know, in our world, the interpretation of that evaluation data helps determine if an IEP is needed. So sometimes they might go through all of this, OTs and PTs, and then they realize, okay, this child doesn't qualify. The scores are too high. Yes, there might be a problem going on, but it's not to the level of where it's impacting school function, okay? And that's actually a good thing, hopefully. So again, like fourth or fifth bullet down, if a student is determined eligible for special ed services, the school system or the system has 30 calendar days to develop and implement the IEP, okay? Some are 60 days, but I think typically they try to get it done within 30 days, okay? A local school system is required to have an IEP in place by the beginning of the school year for any currently eligible students. So what that means, if something happens over the summer or someone's evaluated over the summer, they've got to have that IEP in place by the beginning of the school year, okay? So how do we get involved in this process? There has to be a deficit in self-help, adaptive, play or leisure, sensory motor, cognitive, or psychosocial development. That's for OT. For PT, probably gross motor, accessibility to the environment, and other mobility needs for the child. So if there's an area that is deficit for those children that we just mentioned, we might get involved. But here's the big catch, y'all, at the bottom. It has to impact the learning process, okay? They could have a deficit in self-help, but is it impacting the way they perform during the school day? No, it might not be, okay? So that's the easiest one to compare. Sensory motor, maybe, and maybe the child has, some mild motor planning issues that might affect, very mildly some visual motor issues. But it's not enough to truly impact their function to where they're floundering and not being successful. Could they use, do they see OT on the outside in a private clinic? Sure. Does it benefit them? It may. But it's not our call to make. And also, if the deficit is not impacting their learning process within that school or classroom, then our services are not deemed. They're not warranted. Doesn't mean we're not important. Doesn't mean we can't support, or that we can't reevaluate in a year or two if we feel like a child might fall through the cracks. I'm just trying to help you understand the big picture of when we come in and why we come in and the how. So that's a little bit of that. You saw the stars. Okay, so here's what I call my big university word, methodology, because one day I'm going to get pushed into a doctorate, y'all, and it's going to be painful. I really don't want to yet, but don't tell anybody I said that out loud. Okay, I'm happy where I'm at. Thesis is good. So if we're looking at an IEP and breaking it apart, this document is written when it is determined that a child has a disability and needs special ed, and notice I wrote possibly related services. Okay, so and I'm making sure I'm in the right place with my resources. Okay, so how does the IEP team create this document? Now, we're talking about an initial IEP, y'all. This is some of you will be involved in this. Many of what you were handed a couple of weeks ago when you started school was an IEP already in progress. Okay, so it might have been an initial, and then in a year it will be reviewed, and it will be what's called a renewal. The way that you can tell on your document is somewhere typically on the front page. Sometimes it's the upper right corner, sometimes it's on the right above, where it says individualized education program. It might be underneath. There might be a checkbox that says initial, renewal, or amendment. So those are 3 different types that you can have. So right now, we're talking about Celeste Alexander has been evaluated. She has qualified, through autism eligibility, and we need to write an IEP so that she can get that specially designed instruction. So the team has to consider, and I like this, y'all, first, the child's strengths. Okay, we're not looking, we do look at deficits, but let's not let that cloud our mind and our picture all the time. Let's think about what they can do as well, because guess what? If you're a good OT, you're going to jump on those strengths and you're going to anchor off of that to work on the deficits. That's sort of my own personal philosophy. But why not take something they're good at and analyze it, figure it out, and how can you incorporate and jump off of it and help address a deficit from a strength. We also have to look at the parents' concerns for enhancing the child's education. I know what you're all thinking, and your eyes are rolling, and I'm a parent. I can call myself out. The team also has to consider results of the initial evaluation or the most recent evaluation of a child, which means all of this stuff they've just done, the psychology report, the developmental, the developmental levels of a child. Sometimes those educational diagnosticians do that. We also need to look at the evaluation will usually tell us where this child is academically, developmentally, and their functional needs. Okay, so that's what has to be considered. Then the team determines a present level of academic and functional performance. Okay, now sometimes this alphabet soup is called PLOP or PLOF. Okay, now I never called it that until a few years ago. I always just called it a present level, but a lot of people call it a PLOP or a PLOF. Okay, so this is where this child is today in terms of their academic and functional performance. So we're also going to look at the disability of the child with taking in the general ed environment. Okay, how would this child function if they were in the general ed? We have to consider that. That is always considered. By law, you have to. And when you're sitting in an IEP, if you haven't been in one yet, you'll see when you look at like placement options for a child, the first one's always going to be general education. Top of the choices. It's always there, and it must be considered. You may, reject that option because it's not appropriate and doesn't meet the unique needs of the child, but it has to be considered. Okay. And again, the IEP has to be based on the child's present levels we just talked about. An IEP must include measurable annual goals. Yes, you read annual correctly. You don't have to write them every 4 weeks or every 6 months. And I should have said this in the beginning. If you've come from a quicker pace venue of care, you've left sprinting, you've come to the marathon, okay? So these goals get renewed yearly for these children. And that's, as a newer therapist, I know even now sometimes I still struggle with, where's this kid going to be in a year? And sometimes I am dead wrong, and sometimes I'm sort of near correct, not always. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. Children are children. They develop at different levels, and there are a lot of factors that have to be considered. Okay, so going on, the IEP has to enable the child to be involved and progress in the general ed curriculum somehow, whether they're adaptations, modifications. They're going to anchor off of the general ed curriculum. The IEP must describe how the school will measure your child's progress. Oh, that 4-letter word, data. It's an ugly word sometimes, but it can be helpful. Data can be your friend sometimes. So we'll talk more about that probably next webinar. And then the IEP must show parents of, that is redundant. I have 2 bullets that are the same. I was like, oh, no, they're different. I'm sorry. The school has to talk about how they're going to measure it, and then they have to talk about how they're going to inform the parents of progress, okay? The IEP must also meet other educational and non-educational needs. So non-educational needs would probably be more of those social emotional skills, things like that, okay? Okay, more alphabet soup, a plop. Present level of performance. Y'all, basically it's like a progress summary is what it is, to make it simple, and since I have to talk very, very fast. You're going to describe where the child is and what you're going to talk about their needs, their unique needs that result from that disability, but you're going to talk about how that disability affects school performance. Why? Because that's our job as a school-based therapist. That's the difference between medically based and educationally based. How does this disability affect the school performance? And here's where you put it right on paper. You're going to have your clinical observations and clinical reasoning and data that describes the child's strengths, challenges, and needs. And trust me, the strengths part of the present levels always comes first. So they're trying to be positive, trying to look at the glass half full instead of half empty. So again, you want to determine some pretty solid baseline data, and you use that to develop the goals that we mentioned before. So again, like I said, data can be your friend. You may look at it a few months from now and go, wow, I didn't realize the gains until I really looked at that. Okay, so when we look at present levels in the IEP document, you're going to see the academic areas of reading, math, and spelling, or language. You're going to see functional performance areas, which are the non-academic areas of communication, fine motor skills, behavior and social skills, daily life skills, and any skills that increase independence. So you're going to be writing strengths, weaknesses, and areas of need. You're going to be writing present levels of performance there, okay? So then, after the present level is written, you're going to determine needs, okay? What does the child need? How much special ed per week does the child do they need a classroom all by itself? Is a resource classroom enough? You're going to figure out certain things in the next few steps. The goals are going to help you, okay? Writing the goals. Depending on what the goals are, what the goals say and how many goals there are may determine service time. So here's a little, I'm not going to go off on a big soapbox, but if you're ever in a high-profile IEP or an IEP with an advocate or a lawyer, just be careful. Sometimes the more goals you write and recommend, and they might encourage you to write a lot. Well, we need a goal for that. We need a goal for that. Don't get caught in that, because they will turn around and they will try to tell you that, well, because of the number of goals, we have to increase the service time. And that's not necessarily true. So we can talk more about that. And we have in November, we had an OT that is actually a lawyer presenting for us on the jump. So don't forget November 17th, Allison Stover. That'll be a great one to tune into, and we can talk more about that. But in terms of just figuring out basic needs and where we're going to place this child and figure out how much time, our goals are going to help us do that. Okay. And so far we've been talking about, initial IEPs. Okay. But my note down here, if it's the IEP is not an initial, but an annual review, your goals from that school year are reviewed first. You're going to review the present levels, and then you're going to review goals. Then new goals are written for the upcoming school year. But that's just if you're reviewing an IEP that's already been written like a year ago. Okay, so going on. IEP in process means we're moving down the process. So after you determine needs and write goals, you're going to identify what related services and other supports might be needed to achieve those goals. So here's where we come in. Okay, there are goals that are written for, a lot of fine motor skills. Well, is an OT needed to support those? Or how about access or mobility? In terms of gross motor skills, is a PT needed to support those goals? Then through identification of the related services, you have to start considering service delivery options, which are like direct service, consultative service, those levels. And I think we'll be talking about that too, if not tonight, next September. Okay. Special factors, supplemental aids, and services. Those are, let me quickly get my page for y'all to tell you that. Okay, sorry. Okay, let's see, 37. I knew I was close to the page. Okay, okay. So supplementary aids and services, these, again, it's a little tricky to understand the difference between a related service and the supplementary aids. Supplementary aids are, again, services and support your child receives in general education classes and other settings so your child can be educated with children who are not disabled. So, for instance, if you have a little guy who is going to lunch with the general education class, okay, and he needs headphones in order to participate, be able to eat his lunch in the cafeteria, that's going to be a supplemental aid. Any other special factors, like does the child need adaptive art, things like that. So that's a little bit, a very brief description of those, just that bullet right there. We're going to consider the student supports that might also be needed in terms of testing accommodations. Do they need a separate room? Do they need transportation back and forth? What other student support do we provide in order to have this child educated in the least restrictive environment with this unique instruction? Then we look at, once we've taken that big global picture, we've got goals, we've got special factors, we've got OT and PT and everybody else involved, then we're going to look at placements. Where does this child need to be? Does this child need to be in a self-contained classroom all day long, going in and out of a resource classroom between general education and resource? Does the resource teacher go in? Is sometimes now we have co-taught, where the special ed teacher is co-teaching with the regular ed teacher. Many, many options. But again, that first one's always going to be general education. and the team will either accept or reject instructional placements or instructional options based on the child's needs. You're going to talk about extended school year, which is briefly a 4-week program in most districts, half days, and it's an extension of the current IEP. It is not summer school. It is not working on goals from a new IEP. It is an extension of the current school year in a brief, more abbreviated setting. There'll be documentation of the IEP meeting, which are normally called minutes. And those are important sometimes because things can be left out of the service page, things like that. And you need to read the minutes to find out if something, was discussed. Some minutes are laboriously long, others are extremely short. And then you've got a parent's signature page. Okay, so are we done yet? And I know we're at, oh my goodness, we're at 8:30. So where I was going after that was section 504. Basically what happens if a student with a defined disability is not eligible for services under IDEA, but they do need some accommodations or modifications to benefit from educational programming, that's when section 504 comes in. Okay, a simple, I'm trying to think of a simple example. Oh, a child who might have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, okay, and they cognitively, everything's fine, adaptive, everything's fine. They just need, maybe energy conservation techniques, learning how to protect their joints on, during PE or playground, things like that. That's when a child should have a 504. That's what 504 was meant for. I think now many parents don't want their child labeled under a special education label, so sometimes they rely on 504. So here's a little background. I'll let y'all read this on your own. More information that helps you distinguish between a section 504, what it should provide, and an IEP. And then I've got more example, students with arthritis, cancer, chronic physical impairments, a seizure disorder, something's wrong, and they might need some accommodations, some modifications, but they don't need specialized instruction, okay? And they can be in regular education setting for most of the services, okay? More and more. Section 504 is hard to understand, so that's why I've tried to provide a lot of information for you. And if you have more specific questions, don't hesitate to email or call me about that. Here's another example. Here's a chart comparing the two side by side. This is, I think, this helped me a lot. Again, I'll email this to you. So there's more to go, like OT in action. Here's what we do. Student outcomes, service delivery. And you know what I might do is I might just start here next time. You'll have this PowerPoint. I'll run through it. I talk about the pros and cons of consultative, of direct service. We work in the classroom. Here's what we might do in terms of the classroom. On the playground, here's what we might do on the playground, and the lunchroom, on the school bus, in the hallway, sensory needs, social emotional needs, what we might work on, transition plans and services, and then assistive technology, providing adaptations, modifications, really just collaborating with our teachers. It really should be our middle name, okay? Here's a listing of just some of the assessments we use in a school-based setting. You may be familiar with many of these or not a lot of these, but these are very, very common ones we use. There's also a list of them for OT and PT on Cobb Connects under resources. So if you haven't been to Cobb Connects, you'll see assessments there too. So just in closure, our adventure, there's no disguise. Our job is to support all children's ability to succeed throughout their daily routines and school. That's the fun, okay? That's the satisfaction. That is what makes me happy to get up and go to work every day and do it. And I know no job is perfect. I know there are parents that are very closed. There are teachers that are very closed. But you know what? When you get that child to participate, no matter how long it takes, and you see that learning happening, you see those wheels turning, it is the most, to me, the most rewarding and the most satisfying thing I could do to make that child's world a better place and, you know, make my world a better place. So these are some of the resources that I utilize for the presentation. This is not original by any means in terms of the content. It is all referenced right here. And I thank you. I'm sorry I ran over just a little bit, but thank you, thank you, thank you